I just wanted to welcome everybody to coming tonight to this Invasive Strike Force surveyor training workshop. I'm really excited to have you guys. I hope you guys got all pumped by the orientation video. Get ready to go and get out there and do some good work for our trails and parks in the area. My name is Brent Boscarino, and I'm the Invasive Species Citizen Science Program Coordinator with the New York to Jersey Trail Conference, and just really excited to have you guys be a part of this and consider joining our Invasive Strike Force program. Now, in that opening screen, I had asked everybody to put down what got them excited for being outdoors. And for a lot of you, I noticed that it's hiking, right? And that race to the summit can be like really empowering, invigorating for a lot of you guys. And a lot of our volunteers are in it for the hiking and just being outdoors and those trails. A lot of other of you guys, I also noticed in the chat, just love gardening and that feel of earth and soil on your hands. And so like taking that to the next level to kind of help out with our invasives program is awesome. Like we have a lot of gardeners that volunteer with us. This is actually a look at our Habitat Helpers program and gardening outside Trail Conference headquarters and native wildlife gardening. So we have a lot of volunteers that do that. And what I wanted to say is that essentially, regardless of what your interests were coming here, all of us truly are innately driven to explore and then share stories of that. For those of you who know me, I used to be a high school teacher. And so I was involved in education most of my career before joining the Trail Conference. And I was really lucky because I got to work in a K through 12 setting. So I got to work not just with like high school students, but also younger kids. And there's just something like so powerful about working with kids and just seeing the way that they just explore outdoors and that sense of wonder about the natural world. And here's just a few pictures of me working with those kids. I did a lot with like monarch migration studies, eels in the Hudson River, and just like there's just this sense of like innocence of exploration and discovery that's really exciting. So in my current role, I'm kind of combining all of those interests, like whether you're interested in gardening, hiking, being outdoors, or just simply like love to explore and discover things. Really trying to combine that desire to be outside. We're all here because we love the outdoors in some way. And then to kind of take it to the next level to help coordinate what is called the Citizen Science Driven Invasive Strike Force. And that relies on you guys, the volunteers, the members of the public, community members kind of coming together, all ages. I work with folks that are in high school all the way up to like retirement age people looking to give back. And track invasive species distribution in the Lower Hudson Valley and in northern New Jersey. And honestly, my main objective for you guys is just to build confidence and excitement that not only are you going to be learning about stuff that you're seeing in our parks and along the heights, but like to make sure that you can make a difference and that it really matters to protecting those areas that we all love. So essentially, I am hoping to rekindle that sense of wonder that you had when you were a kid, just like exploring and learning about what it is that's around you. We're all curious by nature, and it's like kind of teasing out that curiosity. We often get bogged down in our adult lives and just kind of like, don't stop as much to kind of smell the roses sort of thing, right? However, oftentimes, even if people do want to explore and they want to learn, oftentimes I get like volunteers working with me that just feel like, look, I just am looking at this forest. It just looks all green to me. There's no way I'm going to be able to like distinguish between these plants. And that's like a real obstacle. Like, people will say that I don't carry a guidebook with me, or just I'll be looking at something and I can't figure out, I'm thumbing through my guidebook. I can't figure out what it is that I'm looking at. It's time consuming. It just never seems like my pictures match up with what's in front of me. There's a lot of scientific words maybe to sift through, and that sea of green can be really intimidating for a lot of people. And that's what I'm here to help you out with. So essentially what we're going to do today is we'll get right into Plant ID 101. Like, how do you sift through that sea of green? How can I help you in that process? So we'll go over some general plant ID features and some useful terms before we get into the specifics, like the shortcuts, the ID tips, the tricks, to start analyzing and looking at invasive species ID that's on our survey list. So I'm going to do that through a combination of PowerPoint slides as well as some taped field ID videos. I mean, we're interacting through a screen right now, but hopefully it'll feel like you're a part of it, like you're with me as I'm sort of in the field showing you some of the ID features of things you're going to be looking for. And then we'll use some mobile apps to help build confidence in addition to what you're learning here today. And then we'll go over like next steps. So we're going to have a follow-up field protocol, or basically like reporting and reviewing a webinar and training. And then we'll go over like what a trail assignment looks like and stuff like that. So that's the agenda for today. And so we're going to dive like right into basic plant ID. So what kinds of things do we look for and look at when we're trying to classify plants? So many of you guys may like be taking notes right now, which is awesome. I suggest that. In this initial part, when I'm just going over general plant ID, don't, of course, take notes if you want, but this is going to be recorded for you. I'm going to give you all of these materials at the end. You can always go back and review it. But this is just like an overview so that you know some of the terms that I'm going to be using when we get into the plant ID stuff. So we'll go with it, and we'll have plenty of time for questions at the end. We'll also have a break at about halfway through, because I know it's a long time to kind of sit in front of a computer. So just hang in there, guys. We'll do the best we can here. So first of all, let's categorize, right? You're looking at that sea of green. You're like, what the heck it is that I'm looking at? Like, how do I start sifting through that? Well, there's a couple of different categories that we can break plants into. First of all, you can think of woody plants. So plants that have produce wood as its structural tissue. So of course, when you think of a tree, you think of wood, bark, having a strong stem. That stem, again, is covered with bark. And just like scientifically, you don't have to know these details, but essentially like, that base is made of cellulose, right? That's going to provide the structure for a plant to grow. And then it's a second compound called lignin that's going to help kind of put together those cellulose tissues to basically like withstand wind and be able to hold itself upright. So we are going to be dealing with some woody plants. And again, these are ones that are going to have hard stems, buds that survive above ground in the winter. And it's not just trees that we're talking about. We're talking about shrubs, right? Shrubs have like stems, bark, that sort of thing. And many of you may not know that there are also vines that we're going to be talking about that are woody vines. We'll contrast that with herbaceous plants. When I say herbaceous, I'm talking about those that don't have persistent woody stems above the ground. So above the ground, the growth largely dies back in the winter, but the underground roots may survive to last another season, right? But we're essentially like, they're floppier, they're more fleshy, right? Herbaceous. They don't have that wood structure to them. So it's a flexible stem, and the stem tends to stay green. So we're thinking about things like wildflowers, right? In a meadow. You may be thinking about agricultural crops like hops, for example. That's herbaceous plant. Or in a forest understory, one of my favorites is Jack in the Pulpit that I'm showing here. This really cool like plant that has these cool features to it. So that's all herbaceous, right? I can kind of bend the leaves and stuff, and there's no woody stem associated with it. So I had mentioned trees. The four categories that we're going to be going over are trees, shrubs, vines, and then truly herbaceous plants. So these may seem simple, but they're kind of arbitrary designations. So a tree is just something that we're going to call that as a single, strong, woody stem. It's usually very tall. So trees are generally categorized as being taller than 13 feet with only one trunk. And they usually have a lot of secondary branches that are supported on that main stem. Shrubs, on the other hand, are woody, but they have multiple woody stems, not just that one trunk of the tree. They're usually shorter than trees, usually less than 13 feet tall. And then another category is vines. So vines can be weak, woody, or they could be non-woody as well. So there's two types of vines. We're all just gonna like lump them together as vines. And this is something that can't stand up with its own weight. So they have to clamber or climb up other plants. They can do that climbing through tendrils, right? Or, they're coiling of the stems around something, or prickles to kind of grasp onto something. And vines don't necessarily have to crawl up. They can also crawl over other things. So this could also be vines that are covering the forest understory as well. And then we'll be also talking about some herbaceous plants. So those are essentially that's long form for herbs. So those are things like grasses and forbs. And by a forb, I mean broad-leafed, often with showy flowers, that sort of stuff. versus grasses, which don't have like the showy flowers associated with them. All right, here's where we get into the nitty gritty of ID. So there's two main types of leaves that you guys should know about, and I'm going to be referring to throughout this presentation. So the first type of leaf is called a simple leaf. And it's just like it says. Essentially, if you look at a leaf blade, right, or the main part of that leaf, it's going to be attached to a stem or you know, a branch to some degree. And right at the base of that leaf stalk, or that what is called a petiole, you're also going to see a bud there where the new growth is going to happen next year. So essentially, with a simple leaf, you have a leaf blade, then a leaf stalk attached to the base, and then a bud that's growing from it. There's also another term that you guys might want to know about called stipules. And if you see right at the base, they're usually at the base of a leaf stalk. And essentially, those are leaf-like appendages. And I want to bring that up because they're usually really distinctive. Like they have a special feature that's like, oh, wow, the stipules look like this. And so it's that kind of plant. Okay, so those stipules are usually at the base of that leaf, but a simple leaf just is basically attached to a branch or a trunk, and the bud is right next to it. And it's that, like if this is a deciduous tree, it'll fall off. I want to contrast that with what's called a compound leaf. And a lot of the invasive plants that we're going to be talking about today have compound leaves. So I guess the question is, how does that differ then from a simple leaf? And what ends up happening is that compound leaves are divided into something called leaflets. And so these right here, this whole thing that's attached to the stem here is what is called a compound leaf, and they're divided into leaflets. So the question is, well, I don't understand, like, why isn't that just a simple leaf here? And the reason why is these leaflets, if you look at the base right here, you see how there's no new bud? Like at the base here, the bud is actually over here. So in the fall, when this leaf falls off, the whole thing falls off. These individual leaflets do not. Hopefully that makes sense to you, but essentially this whole thing is going to fall off the tree in the fall. And so a compound leaf is divided into these little leaflets that are coming off of that main stem. This is just another kind of like actual look at a plant here that has a compound leaf. And you'll notice that this is the leaf stalk right here, this whole thing. And this whole thing is the leaf. And these are just little leaflets. And you'll know that because there's no bud at the base of the leaflet. The bud is actually right here. This whole thing is a compound leaf. And a lot of the things that we'll be talking about today are compound leaves. So that's something you'll have to know. I can also talk about compound leaves. I can talk about its shape, right? Most of the compound leaves are what are going to be called pinnately compound leaves. And what that term means, pinnate, means like a feather. And you can see the similarity. You see this feather right here and sort of that middle part of it. And you see how that kind of compares to the compound leaf structure here? It kind of looks feathery, right? I can describe a compound leaf as being oddly pinnate. And what that means is that you see how it's nice and even here? It's got a leaflet off there, a leaflet off there, leaflet, leaflet. And then there's this one at the end that makes it an odd number of leaflets. That's called a terminal leaflet. Or it could be evenly pinnate. So in other words, those leaflets are coming off on an even number off of that main middle part or that main leaf stalk, right? Okay, I can also talk about leaves in terms of leaf arrangement. Okay, so we could have leaves at the base of it, and we call those basal leaves. There's nothing that we're going to be talking about today in our invasive plants that have basal leaves to it. But here's one I really want you guys to know. Alternate versus opposite. Where are the leaves coming off of the branch or the main stem? If leaves are alternating on a stem, it means that they're not right next to one another. They're kind of zigzagging along the stem. You see how, like, if there's a leaf coming off of my hand here, there's another one that's coming off down there, and then down there. They're alternating along that stem. Versus opposite leaves, they're coming off the main stem opposite of one another. So they're like, here's a leaf, and there's one right next to it across the stem or that branch. There's also a term called whorled leaves, like if they're going in a big whirlwind around the stem. But there aren't any that we're going to be talking about today. Just wanted to like let you know that that's also another leaf arrangement that you might see out in nature. We can also refer to not just the leaves, having alternate and opposite structure on it. But we can also talk about the branches. So like I was talking about leaves on a branch, right? But what about the branches on the main stem? Well, we can also say that something has opposite branching. It's the same thing, just means that the branches are coming off opposite of one another, or they're alternating in that zigzag-like fashion. This is just an example of what a branch would look like, having alternating branches. You see how that's coming off there, and then it goes down a little bit, then it comes off there, that zigzag-like fashion, versus opposite branches. Again, they're coming off like that. This would be like maple trees, for example, have opposite branching on them. And that's pretty actually unique to have opposite branching. It's actually really rare in nature. It's usually alternating. Okay, I can also talk about, same thing, guys. This is no more complicated. It's just different parts of the plant, right? That you can also refer to the buds as having opposite budding. So the buds are coming off opposite of one another. Or they could be alternating along the branch. There's also, you get like some cool things. Like notice how these buds are spiraling around the branch. That's kind of cool. I mean, it's like alternating, but they're kind of like rotating along it as it goes up. I also might refer to something as having a terminal bud. And remember, terminal, to terminate, means to end, right? So terminal bud just essentially means that there's there's a single bud at the end. So that's a terminal bud. Or the buds might happen in clusters at the end of a branch. So these just might be terms that you might see as we go along here. All right. I can also look at the leaf and say, how does veins, like remember that veins are ways of getting nutrients and water up through the roots, through the tree trunk, or if it has a stem of some sort, and then into the leaves, right? So I can refer to the veins on that leaf as being pinnate. And remember, pinnate, all that means is feather-like. And you see how that looks like a bird feather? So I'm just talking about veins that are coming off of the leaf. I can also refer to leaves as being palmate, and if essentially that's fan shaped. And the way you got to think about that is like, look at my palm that I'm holding up here, right? I've got a main base, and all the veins are coming off of it, or like my fingers coming off of my palm. They're all going in separate directions. So that's what palmate means. And that's things like maple, like oak would have that sort of like look to it, right? Arcuate, all you need to think about is arc. Arc being tipped or curved, right? Having a curve to it. So some veins are going to be curved towards the tip. So if I'm describing something as having curved veins, that's what I mean, like arcuate tips. I can also have the veins, I can also refer to the veins as being parallel. That's pretty obvious, right? So things like grasses, if you go out and just like pull out a grass, usually it's just going to have parallel veins that are running up and down it. Okay, there's only a few that we have that are like that on our ISF list. So it's either pinnate, palmate, arcuate, or parallel. Those are the main ones we're going to be talking about. I can also describe a leaf in terms of its margins. So think about what the word margin means to you. So if I hold up this notebook right here, here are my margins. That means the outside edge of that paper or whatever I'm working with, right? So how would I describe the margin or outer edge of a leaf? I can refer to it as entire, or another name for entire is smooth. So it has a smooth edge. It means that it's entirely, there's no like bumps or anything. It's entirely smooth on the outside edge. A lot of the ones that we're going to be talking about have teeth on them. They're toothed in some sense. So they're like serrated. So think about a serrated knife. You know how you can use a serrated knife to cut through tomatoes or something? Think about it like that. So you can have a serrated or toothed margins to it. And it's just to the degree to which they have teeth on the edge. Sometimes you can refer to outer margins as being dentate. Think about your teeth. Like if you open up your mouth and you look at a side profile of your teeth, it kind of looks like grinding molars here, right? So I can refer to it as dentate, or having like serrated margins, or having toothed margins, right? Leaves can also be described in terms of lobes, or having kind of like really organized, kind of rounder, much like grander look to it, like maple. Here's an oak, these are oak, for example. So having lobes to them, like lobes on like your earlobes or something. Just think about it in that respect. Or I can describe leaves as being divided. Now, if you were paying attention to what a compound leaf was, you will know that a compound leaf is divided, right? And what's it divided into? It's divided into leaflets. So remember that if I've got a compound leaf and here's the bud, this whole thing's going to fall off. The leaf itself, this whole thing here, is divided into different leaflets. So that's another way to think about it. Okay, so that's divided leaf margins. I can also describe a leaf as what's going on in its surface. I can describe it as being very smooth. So if you touch a leaf, does it feel very smooth on its surface? I can also describe leaves as being very waxy. Does it have a waxy coating on it? I can describe it as being fuzzy or hairy. Here's a look at one of the invasive species we're going to be talking about today. It's called tree of heaven. And it has these glands and this hairs on it that make it very distinctive. So I might be referring to, fuzzy or hairy feeling of a leaf. I can also describe the twig or the inside of twigs. That can also be really, really good for identifying plants. So I can look at a twig and its outside coloration. I would describe this as like olive colored or brownish red or something. But I can also describe the inner filling. So think about a Twinkie and the inner cream in the middle, right? What's in it? So that's what the pith is the Twinkie filling of a twig. And I can describe that in terms of its color or also how it's organized. What's kind of cool is I could describe this as homogeneous, meaning all one color. It's like the Twinkie filling. And there are some that are actually divided into diaphragms or like these little chambers. You see how like the inside part is divided into like the filling is divided up into chambers? That's what it looks like in a walnut twig, for example. Or the inside pith could be hollow, like there's literally nothing in the middle. When I open up a honeysuckle, for example, there's nothing in the middle. There's like an empty filling. It's like you're having a Twinkie without any cream in it. So I can also describe the twigs in terms of having tiny bumps on it. Those are called lenticels. You see these little dots on it? That's used for oxygen exchange in certain twigs, and that can help you with some ID features. Like, does it have these little bumps on its surface? I can also look at twigs and be like, oh, wow, it left behind a scar. So remember those big compound leaves, right? They fall off at the end of the year. When the leaves fall off trees and fall off plants, they leave behind a scar. And that can actually be a really good ID feature. Many of you may not know that, but it leaves behind this scar. And this is like a scar that's left behind. That's a scar that's left behind on a walnut tree, for example. That happens to be tree of heaven. All right. So now we're getting into the nitty gritty. So that's the basic like Plant ID 101 general terms that I might be using throughout this talk. So now let's get into like identifying plants. And essentially the way you got to think about it is it's no different than picking people out in a crowd. So if I look at a crowd of people like this, I can clearly see that there are differences between those people. They're all like, we're all the same species here. And so it should be even theoretically easier to determine what types of plants I'm looking at. Yeah, they're all green, but there's a lot of different species that are going on here. So I'm going to help you out with that. So it's just like teasing through, just like looking through a crowd of people, I can identify certain individuals. I can do the same in a forest. So how do we start IDing the plants that are on our list? What clues are we going to look for? So remember that I used to be a teacher, so I'm like fascinated with mnemonic devices for helping with this thing. And essentially you guys are going out because this should be fun for you. So your mnemonic device to remember when you're looking at a sea of green is this should be fun. I'm trying to ID plants. So let the fun begin. Let's see if you can guess what the L, T, F, and B stand for. The L is going to refer to leaf. I'm going to look at the leaf. I'm looking at a sea of green. I'm looking at the leaf. That's the L. I'm going to look at twigs. I'm going to look at those branches. Does that tell me, so give me some clues about what it is I'm looking for? I can also look at a fruit or flower on that plant. That might help me and give some tricks. Or I can look at the bark. All of these are like little tools in your toolkit that you can use to help with your ID. Just remember the mnemonic device, let the fun begin. That stands for leaf, twig, fruit or flower, and bark. Okay, so we're going to use this on our first species on our list. So if you're taking notes, we're about to get into species number 1. We're going through 14 today. Okay, so here we go. Hope you guys are ready. Tree of heaven. So this is just a big glimpse at everything I'm going to be talking about right here. So we're going to be looking at leaves. We're going to be looking at its seeds. We're going to be looking at its flowers potentially, its twigs, right? Its bark. We'll also be looking at it in profile. So you might have these in your backyard or on roadsides where you see this like really skinny, narrow trunk, and then it's got this palm tree appearance to it. But let's try to use our mnemonic devices to break this down. I just gave you a lot. Don't worry, I'm going to go through this in a lot of detail. In the first, like tree of heaven, I'm going to go through a lot of detail on, and then until you guys get in a rhythm of what you're going to be looking for. So we're going to take a lot of time with the first two, and then we're going to go a little bit quicker through the rest. So let's take a step back. Have any of you guys read A Tree Grows in Brooklyn? This was on my high school reading list back in the day. And essentially the tree that was featured in that, the main metaphor for that is like this hardy tree of heaven. With the persistent ability to grow and flourish, and that kind of mirrors the protagonist and ability to thrive under like adverse conditions. And that's essentially what makes Tree of Heaven an ideal invasive. It can really like thrive in poor conditions, right? Or like in tough conditions. And that was the metaphor that was made throughout that book, and that was the tree that was featured. So this tree was introduced to the US in around 1784, and then in the West Coast in around the 1850s. And essentially, it was initially valued as a shade tree in a lot of the cities, like in Brooklyn, New York, right? It was put there as a shade tree because it was really hardy. Well, look what's happened. It was introduced into like essentially like Philadelphia area, into these northeastern cities, and now it's all over the place, and it's run rampant. That's what happens with invasive plants, unfortunately, right? And what makes it so like invasive, right? It grows very rapidly. So Tree of Heaven is thus called because it grows straight up to heaven. That's why it's called the Tree of Heaven, because of its fast growth rate. In fact, it can reach a height of up to 80 feet tall. In its first year of growth, it can grow 6 to 12 feet, guys. 6 to 12 feet in 1 year. It's a prolific seeder. Some Tree of Heaven, when it gets mature, can produce 300,000 seeds annually. Can you believe that? 300,000 just in one tree alone. And if you've ever tried to remove this from your property, it is almost impossible because it is a persistent stump sprouter. So you try to cut it down, and all these stumps will start sprouting out from the thing you try to cut down. It also sends out stress signals through its roots that it's trying to be gotten rid of. And then it can start colonizing and like sending out like signals to start growing new stems up from that original parent tree. So this is like a big colony of it. It's also allelopathic, meaning that it can release chemicals that inhibit the growth of things next to it. And like I alluded to before, it can live in a wide variety of soils, poor quality soils, and it can cause all sorts of problems. So there's a lot of reasons why it's become invasive. So if we break it down, we know that it's persistent, we know it's invasive. So how can we use our mnemonic devices to look for what it is that we're trying to look at? And then I'll do a field ID video with you. So remember the L. You can look at the leaves. Tree of Heaven has a pinnately compound leaf, and it's a really kind of, you can really see that feather-like appearance to it. All of these are leaflets. This whole thing is a leaf. It can range in 1 to 4 feet in length as it matures. And the leaflets themselves are opposite on that leaf stalk. So remember, this whole thing is falling off the tree in the fall. It has very smooth margins. Remember that we can look at the edge or the margins or outer edge of that leaf. You'll also notice something. So not only is it smooth or entire, as we said, like there's no teeth on the edge, besides at its base. Take a look at its base. You see this little notch here, and then it has a little gland at the end. If you've ever tried to remove Tree of Heaven from your property, you'll notice something. It is smelly. And the reason why, it has almost like a rancid peanut butter, like a burning tire smell to it or something. That's because it has a gland at the end that when you rub it, it smells like that. And that's where that smell is coming out. It's always like a little gland or nipple that's at the edge or that notches of its leaflet. Smelly. I can also look at, let the fun begin, right? The T is twig. I can also look at its leaf scars. Remember, that big compound leaf can fall off of the Tree of Heaven, and it leaves behind this leaf scar. And it looks like, if you're looking from the side, doesn't it kind of look like Pac-Man that's swallowing like those little, like, I don't know, what are those little things that Pac-Man swallows, those little things. So here it's swallowing a bud, right? Or another way to remember it is like Tree of Heaven, love. right? So like it almost has that heart-shaped leaf scar to it. So love, heaven, heart-shaped. It also has a brown pith, but I doubt you're going to be like taking a knife and looking at the pith, but just wanted to point that out. It also has lenticels on it, though those tiny white bumps, especially when it's younger. The F part, it has its fruit comes in the form of these seeds. So this is the little fruit that's inside it. And doesn't it look like little eyeballs? So you might see this in the winter time. They look like leaves, but they're not. They're actually these little eyeballs that are seeds. They're called samaras, and they're winged seeds. During its ripe season, they can turn pinkish or yellowish. In the winter time, you'll see it as like papery, like brownish, and that's what they look like in the winter. So that's what its fruit. That's what its fruit looks like. You can also use the bee or the bark strategy, and this is a really great tool. If you guys have, hopefully you guys have all eaten cantaloupe or seen the rind of a cantaloupe at some time. If you feel the rind of a cantaloupe on the outside, that's what tree of heaven looks like. See how it like, I don't know, you'll know what I'm talking about if you've seen cantaloupe. That's what it feels like and what it looks like from the side. When it's younger, it can be reddish brown and it kind of grays as it gets older, but essentially that's how you can tell it from the bark. So that's, in a nutshell, the let the fun begin, right? So now we're going to take some time and I'm going to show you a field ID video. And as I play these videos for you, it'll be like you're in the field with me. You're not going to hear my voice come through as clearly because it's playing through my speakers, but you'll hear my voice clear enough. And you'll also notice because it's Zoom and Zoom has its own issues. It might be a little like jumpy, but you'll get the basic gist of it over time. You'll get to see what it is that we're looking at. So let's take a look at it's one thing to look at pictures, guys, but it's a whole nother to actually have video and see the variations in nature. Here's what Tree of Heaven looks like. In about like a few weeks, it'll start looking like this. In this part of the park, I wanted to show you a couple of different versions of what Tree of Heaven looks like when it's really young, then also when it's mature at this time of year. I'm filming this on June 26th to give you a good sense. This was last year. But you can see this big tree here. Do you see how it's got that cantaloupe rind look to it that I mentioned in the PowerPoint? And if you look up, I know it's going to be a little bright up there, but it's got almost that like palm tree kind of look to it. So as you can see here, you know, it's got those opposite leaflets that are coming off of it, but I can tell from that sort of like cantaloupe rind that I'm looking at a Tree of Heaven. But let's take a quick look at this one here, which is really low to the ground, and you can see what it looks like when it's immature or a very young version of the Tree of Heaven. Remember how I told you that you can look at the leaf scars? Well, here's a really good look at the leaf scar here. Remember, it's got almost like that heart shape to it, like Tree of Heaven. So you see that little Pac-Man? See that little heart shape? That's the leaf scar right there. Love, heart, and this is where the big leaves, remember that these are big leaves that consist of leaflets. So what you're looking at here will eventually, this whole thing is a leaf, and where it connects to that stem, that will eventually fall off and then leave these little leaf scars behind, as you can see here. So again, that leaf scar is a good way to look at it. And you can take a look at the bark. It's got all those lenticels and then the leaf scar here. Let's take a look at these leaflets and what they look like. So remember that these are very, very smelly, and the leaflets are coming off opposite of one another. And if I zoom in very, very close there, let's take a quick look. Hopefully it focuses. You see right above where my thumb is, that lip right here. You can even see the bump as I pause it. Does everyone see that? Little notch there with the gland on it. And that is what's going to give it that distinctive odor. So if I pulled this off, right, crunch it up in my hands, smell it. Yep, it's got that burnt kind of smell to it, especially when it's been raining. It's a little dry right now, and the smells are not as strong. But this one actually has a double notch on it. So you might see a single notch or double notch at the bait. That's over here. See how it's two? This one's starting to get two notches. Sometimes it's one, sometimes it's two. But remember, the edges of these leaves are smooth, unlike sumacs and walnuts, which super important to understand because it's easy to confuse with sumac. This is a smooth margin. Sumacs are not. That's a huge difference.
Also kind of look like it, but it doesn't have those smooth edges, and they also don't have those notches at the back like Tree of Heaven does, right? So look for those smooth edges on the leaflets.
All right, so that's Tree of Heaven and what you may be seeing in a few weeks. I also just wanted, just so you know, like things do change over time. So I took these pictures this morning, actually, of what Tree of Heaven is looking like this time of year. They're reddish right now, but you can still see, I mean, you can still tell the features. You see how it's like still coming off. Those leaflets are opposite of one another. There's more like reddish stems and base to that leaf right now. And it almost looks like little tufts of hair that are coming out. This is another picture that I took this morning. You see how it's little tufts of hair? I don't know if any of you guys have kids or grandkids or whatever, but like they look like, you know, Phineas and Ferb. Does anyone know what I'm talking about? See how there's like, I don't know, it's just like kind of a white base and then kind of little tufts of hair. That's what it looks like to me right now. But in a couple of weeks, it's going to look like it was in the other video. So I don't know. I don't know if that's helpful, but I don't know. That's what it looks like to me. It can grow as a in a shrub-like fashion like this, which is really easy to confuse with sumacs when it does that. But the vast majority of the time, it's going to grow straight up, super narrow trunk, and then kind of that palm tree look to it. This is what a sumac would look like. And you can see why it might be confused with Tree of Heaven, because it's got the leaflets that are opposite of one another. But there's a couple of different ways to tell it apart. You see how this has notched margin? If you're looking at serrated edges of the margins, you know it's a sumac, or you know it's not Tree of Heaven. The other difference is, remember what the fruit was on Tree of Heaven? It was the winged seeds. That's the fruit of sumac. It's like these drupes. That's unmistakable. So like if you see this, you know it's not Tree of Heaven, even though the leaves might look the same. Serrated edges. The only other thing that people confuse it with is walnut trees. So walnuts, for example, also have this opposite leaflets on it, but walnut bark is very distinctive. It almost has like a diamond shape to its pattern. And of course, you can look for clues on the ground. If you see walnuts under the tree, you know it's a walnut, right? This is what a walnut would look like under the tree. So, but people will confuse walnuts with Tree of Heaven just because it has that compound leaf structure to it. Also, again, walnuts have serrated edges. Tree of Heaven does not. All right. Even after all this, I went through a lot of detail on Tree of Heaven. Let's say you're raising your hand, you're still confused, okay, in the field, because sometimes that happens. So what else can you do? That's where apps come in. And I know that so many of you are rolling your eyes right now saying, I have so many apps on my phone, Brent. Please don't do this to me. I'm telling you, it's a game changer. It'll change your life. It'll get you so confident about what it is that you're looking at. Seek is essentially, you may have used iNaturalist, but Seek is amazing. It basically scans iNaturalist, which is a photo database of like millions of pictures all throughout the world. And in real time, you can point your phone at what you're looking at, and it'll tell you like a barcode scanner at the grocery store exactly what it is that you're looking at. So this person, for example, is looking at, I can't read it here, but it gives the species and what it is that he's looking at. And I'm going to show you how it works in a second. So essentially, it takes a lot of the guesswork out. You can use the tips that I've told you today, but it's a great supplement to field guides. It's a huge time saver and satisfies curiosity. I see that the chat is blowing up, but hopefully it's not people saying Seek is terrible, because honestly, it's been great for me. Like, it's such a useful tool. So I wanted to show you how it works and how helpful it can be to you. So I'm going to play a tutorial, and I'll walk you through like how it works. And essentially, don't be intimidated by it. If you can use the camera function on your phone, that's all you need to do. That's all it takes, guys. It's just essentially pointing your screen at something. Okay, so essentially this guy is looking at something right now in this meadow. He has no idea what it is. He's holding his phone up to it in real time. It gives a message up here that it says species, and then what species it is, if it knows, and if it knows what it is that it's looking at with good confidence. Sometimes it'll say in that green part on the top, it'll say something like, some general category, not like family or something like that. And then it'll say something like dicots, which is a really, really broad category of plants. If you do that and you hold your phone up and it's saying dicots or something, try to change the angle of how you're holding it. Get closer, move it out. But the good thing is that it gives you immediate feedback that it doesn't know what it's looking at, or it does know what it's looking at. And your whole goal is to get this to read species, not genus, not family, whatever. And oftentimes, if it doesn't know what it's looking at, it'll say dicots, and then Seek isn't going to help you in that circumstance. But if you play around with it, oftentimes with a lot of the common ones, it does a phenomenal job of IDing it. So you're just trying to like essentially like move your phone around until you get it to say species and what it is that you're looking at. Okay, I'm going to play this video through. Okay, you see how it's saying class dicots? That's a really broad category. So this guy now needs to change the angle on his phone till it gets to species. Boom, species, blue blossom. So now he knows what he's looking at just by changing his phone angle. And it gives him real feedback in real time. Unlike iNaturalist or some other apps where you have to take the picture, load it. Did I take the right angle? Whatever. That's why I like Seek, because it gives you feedback immediately. You can, but you don't have to, take a picture of what it is that you're looking at, and then you can learn about it. It will tell you if it's native or invasive. It will say introduced if it's something that is non-native. It'll say introduced. In this case, that dwarf checker mellow, I think this is out in California somewhere, is native. It'll tell you about it. It'll go to its Wikipedia page and you can read all about it. Now, again, you do not have to take a picture with Seek. It's just extra steps that you can take if you want to learn about what it is that you're seeing. It'll give you its range map of where it's found and where people have posted. It'll tell you about its taxonomy. If you want to take these extra steps, again, you don't have to. You can use it as a barcode scanner. If you have kids, there's games you can play on it. You can take certain challenges. It can be really fun. Again, you don't have to do this, but you can level up and play badges. They give you challenges for like biodiversity challenges. It's kind of fun. So this is not the end all and be all, but it's a helpful tool that you can use to kind of start building confidence that like, I think that's Tree of Heaven, but I'm not really sure. So I'm going to use Seek just to like, let's just see what it thinks kind of thing. All right, let's practice. If you guys have Seek on your phone, let's try using it just to practice. So if you have your phone out, open up your Seek app and let's see if you can identify this guy that's in front of you right now. Open up your Seek app on your phone. It's a little green icon with a leaf on it. It's going to look something like this. And then at the bottom, if you look at my screen, look at me, hit that little camera button. That's it. Once it's in your camera function, you're just going to hold it up on the phone. Give me a thumbs up if it told you what it is. Hopefully it says spotted lanternfly, which is a dreaded invasive species we're trying to keep out of New York State. It'll say it in the species, and then it'll tell you if you can take a picture of it, and then it'll teach you all about spotted lanternfly if you want to learn about it. But that's just essentially how it works. It can work on your computer screen. It can work outdoors. It's awesome. So spotted lanternfly uses Tree of Heaven as its primary host tree. So this is just, I wanted just to give you guys some practice with the app to show you its power and how it can help you with IDs and help build your confidence really quickly. I use it in my backyard all the time. My kids love it. You just walk around your backyard, you learn so much in like 15 minutes. It's crazy, especially if you cue in on like the flowers or leaves or whatever. That's what it's really like scanning. All right. That was a lot on just one species, but that was a lot of like background. Now we can kind of move a little quicker. We're on to the second tree now. Norway maple. Norway maple is one that you probably have in your yard or your property. It's a large deciduous, so meaning it loses its leaves, canopy tree that can be super tall, up to 90 feet tall. And it's known for its like oval, rounded crown, really heavy, dense leaf canopy. That's why it was brought over to the United States, because of, its ornamental qualities, as well as like it was a really good shade tree. So it was introduced in the 1700s as an ornamental shade tree. It has a really nice canopy, and it provides a lot of shade for parks and those sorts of things. So its main mechanism of spread throughout the United States was really through purposeful planting. However, it is most certainly a threat to our native forests, because it's getting out from plants, from its plantings, and now getting out into areas where it's causing a lot of problems. And again, how do I know what type of maple that I'm looking for? Again, leaf, twig, fruit, and bark, right? And again, Norway maple, because of its dense canopy, is shading out a lot of the forest understory. And the reason why is, if you look at its leaves, it's generally much broader than its another congener, essentially. It's sugar maple, which is a native species. So here, if we're looking at the leaves of Norway maple versus sugar maple, you'll notice a few things. So Norway maple leaves tend to be much broader, tend to be like a little bit greener. But if you're really looking at the difference between them, notice the edges of its lobes. You see how it's like a pointed tip at the end? Versus sugar maple, if I really zoom in on it, yeah, it comes to a tip, but it's not really, really sharp at the end. And that's one way to tell the difference, just by looking at leaves alone, the difference between Norway maple invasive and our native sugar maples, that it's kind of like out competing because it's kind of like shading it out. In fact, like under a Norway maple canopy, like there can be 98% of all the seedlings found underneath it are from that Norway maple. There's really not much else, because it's so good at shading things out. Another good way I'll show you in the video when we go out to the field is, if you snap the petiole of that leaf stalk, you'll see a milky white sap coming from it. And the way that I remember that is that when you think of Norway, I don't know, I think of like cold and ice and snow and stuff like that. So Norway has the white sap, like snow and ice, like Norway. Versus sugar maples do not have that when you break it off. Okay, you can also look at the twigs to tell the difference between them. Sugar maples, if you look at its twigs and its buds, you'll notice that they're brownish. They look more like pine coney to me in sugar maples, versus Norways have much fewer scales, 1, 2, 3, 4 in the middle, and they come like to a point or a tip, just like its leaves come to a tip. Versus everything with a sugar maple is more rounded, right? Even its buds are more rounded. So you can look at the Norway maples, they're reddish purple, versus the brown of the sugar maple and more rounded tips to it. So that's another way. If you're like, the leaves are too high for you and you're like, I don't see the leaves, you can look at like maybe some buds of it and look at like, does it have the pointed tips and reddish look to its buds? You can also look at the fruits. This is really, really distinctive. So sugar maples have like, you see this angle of its seeds. Sugar maples have like, imagine that this is like a buttocks or something, and these are its legs, and it's standing up or something, right? So here are legs, and the sugar maples are standing with these round seeds in it. Versus Norway maples, imagine those legs are doing splits, and they're much more flattened, right? So Norway maples have flattened, and the legs are doing splits, versus on sugar maples, they're kind of like standing up and more like rounded between them. You can also use the bark strategy, right? Sugar maples don't have a very distinctive pattern to its bark. It's kind of like scaly. You see the difference between these two here? Norway maples from the side have almost like really deep, organized grooves to them. Versus sugar maples, they're kind of scaly. Like if you just looked at the bark alone, it's highly, highly patterned. It's like someone went through there and like carved grooves in it, that in a very like purposeful way. Versus sugar maple, it's kind of all over the place. All right, so that is using the mnemonic device. And then here's what it will look like in the field and some of the variations between it. Lots of windows open for you here, but here we go.
patterned, deeply grooved.
I'm gonna go right to the leaves in a
Sugar
second
maple,
here.
on the other hand, which you'll see in a second, doesn't have this type of like clear arrangement of its bark. Here is a look at a Norway maple leaf. And this is at the beginning of May, and look at how broad and how well grown out the leaf is already. If I zoom in a little bit closer, you will see that the edge comes to a tip. You see that tip that's coming out there right by my finger where I'm moving my finger? So sugar maple is going to have a much more rounded end to it versus Norway maple. You've got these nice broad leaves, and it has this tip that's coming off at the end versus sugar maple, which is going to be more rounded. Another way to tell is if I take it and I take off the leaf and I squeeze, you see that milky white substance that's coming out here? So if that milky white, okay, is not going to be coming out of the sugar maples. So that sticky white substance that's going to come off, you see how it's even sticking to my finger there? That is clear indication that you've got a Norway maple. But again, looking at the broadness of the leaf, and if I look up this tree, this is at the beginning of May. Look at how green that tree is. In a second, I'm going to show you for comparison just what a sugar maple looks like.
This is where it gets its invasive qualities from. It leaves out earlier, and it just like before all the native maples. And so it just like kind of shades it out, and it has a longer growing season, right? And that's how it's able to
at the same
outcompete.
time of year, and why the invasive Norway maple has such a competitive advantage. So again, looking at the pattern of the bark, which is a clear up and down pattern, the leaves with the milky sap, broader leaves, tips at the end, so much narrower pointed tips, and look at the fullness of these leaves, bigger, darker, more full, and more green at this time of year. Here is a lookalike alert. This is not Norway maple. In fact, this is a sugar maple. And you can see by the scale of my thumb, almost like probably 2 or 3 thumbs worth is going to be the length of this relative to the Norway maple that I just showed you. It's just much smaller. It's still a little bit red. In fact, you know, this is greener than a lot of the sugar maples that I'm seeing out at the beginning of May right now. But really, its distinguishing feature from Norway is if you take a look, remember how Norway had that point? Yes, I mean, it does have the point of the maple leaf, but you see how it's much more, it's nuanced, and this is actually rounded. If you get very, very close, you see that it's rounded at the end and doesn't have that very clear point. So if you take a look at sugar maple leaves, it's just a little bit rounder at the point of each of these lobes. So that's one distinguishing feature, and certainly what gives it a not as much of an edge. It's just leaves.
So just remember that these were taken at the same time of year. So these videos, you can see it's behind in its growth relative to the Norway maple. The only other thing I wanted to point out is that there's our red maples. So red maples, you may see out in the forest too. You'll notice that red maples have those like the seeds that are not spread out. And the only other difference, just for the sake of time, I'm not gonna go. Actually, yeah, I might as well just show you this. Hold on.
And you can see that its seeds actually have like quite a reddish color to it. And in the fall, you'll notice that the leaves that you're seeing just starting to grow now on this tree will turn a nice red in the fall. And that's some distinguishing characteristics of the red maple. Take a closer look at these seeds. Not only are they red, but you'll notice that the angle on them is actually much different from the Norway maple seeds. So Norway maple seeds, if you think of these as legs and pointing down, 2 legs pointing down, the Norway maple seeds almost look like they're doing a split, almost very close to 180 degrees.
I'm going to zoom ahead here just so you can see. This is the main difference, is that the red maples have 3 lobes. You see that? Versus the other ones had 5. So it's just 1, 2, 3. So not only are the seeds different, but the red maples have the 3 lobes. So that's in summary what the main difference is. Alrighty. The next one on our list, new species. I want you to use seek on this. We're going to practice using seek. You're going to tell me what the next species is. You may have to move it around on the screen. You might also have to get out of the spotted lanternfly thing. Is it telling you what it is? I'm going to check the chat. Thank you, Dono. Did everyone get autumn olive? If not, keep moving the phone around. Nice. Very good, guys. See, I'm telling you, it's useful. It's going to really help. So when we talk about autumn olive, that's our next species. So autumn olive is usually, it can be multi-stemmed, but I put it under the tree category because it can also grow as a tree, because it can grow like actually to be pretty tall. It's over 13 feet. And that's another reason why it's categorized as a tree sometimes, but I've also seen it categorized as a shrub. I'm going to get into the details of the ID, but this is what it looks like from a distance. And it's got these really like silvery leaves that are really distinctive that I'll show you in the field portion of it. But just a brief introduction to it. It's native to China, Japan, and Korea. It was introduced in 1830 as an ornamental plant. And it was actually planted like as promoted for wildlife habitat and as an erosion control and to help restore soils that were like degraded by mining. You know, but essentially it escaped its planting and is now kind of infringing upon our forests and kind of shading out a lot of the things that are underneath it and growing out. So again, it was by the mid 1900s, it was everywhere. Like it was being planted everywhere and it was escaping control. Now, many of you guys may actually harvest the olives on it. They apparently are like really pucker heavy. You know, even the unripe berries have like a lot of pucker power, I guess. I've never tried it myself, but you can make jams out of it. Apparently has a lot of lycopene in it. But you know, now it's found in all these different states having escape control. Some of the reasons for invasion success is it's drought, insect, and disease resistant. So unfortunately, it matures very quickly. It can produce seed within 2 to 3 years, which gives it a competitive advantage. It tolerates salt and low soil pH. So that's another reason why it was planted in certain areas, because of that tolerance. But essentially it forms these dense colonies, and it's, you know, its seed production is, you know, they're widely, the olives themselves are widely dispersed by birds. It's really, if you ever try to get rid of it, it resprouts really easily after cutting. So, and just like a lot of the other invasives, you know, it's early leaf out and the seeds persist for a long time into the fall, all these competitive advantages to it. In terms of its ID, which is the main purpose of this this webinar, I'll show you what it looks like in the field. And I took this the other day. So I think it's right after this. Give me a second here. Okay. Hopefully this will play for you.
Here's a look at a field full of autumn olive, and I wanted to do this kind of zoomed out view as I walk towards it, because you can really notice this even from like a roadside, especially this time of year in May.
I know the film's probably jumpy, but it'll stabilize in a second.
Time of year, it's mid-May right now, are the flowers. So let's take a look at what these flowers look like. You can see that they are whitish, 4 main petals that are coming out of it. And from a distance, they even can give off like a bit of a kind of a yellowish sheen to it. You see that here as I sort of pan across this. But really, the flowers are white. But really, the hallmark feature that's kind of really neat about autumn olive are the leaves itself. Okay, so first of all,
isn't that super cool? I mean, I gotta say, it's an invasive plant, so I shouldn't be calling it cool. But look at that; it looks like fish scales, right? They're like these little dots on the surface. Hopefully that's coming through in the video here.
If you zoom in very, very close there, you see how there are these like silver scales on it, almost like little fish scales that are popping out. And if you flip on the other side of the leaf, you can really see it kind of shimmering in the sunlight.
And again, I'll say it in the video too. It looks like someone spray painted it silver. It's crazy, like especially if you're up close with it.
Right here, almost like someone spray painted the back of this leaf a silver color, and that's really obvious. Even as we lose the flowers and their color, and the flowers kind of fall off or whatever, you can still see that sort of silvery whitish sheen to it. So this is what it's going to look like this time of year. The only other thing you'll notice about autumn olives, if you look at it from the side, you see how it's got kind of like a wavy look to its leaves. That's not because it's dry and wilted. This is you'll find this at any time of year, really. The kind of these leaves that are kind of have this like wave-like appearance to them when looked at the side. So again, here's another look at the undersides of it, that kind of spray painted silvery look. And as we zoom in really close, those really nice studded dots on it. I want to juxtapose that with another kind of white flowering plant that is invasive, but it just doesn't happen to be on our list. You'll also see this is a bush honeysuckle, and you can see the white flowers here. But again, it's not.
I just want to show you this because this is the other thing that's flowering white, and they're everywhere in my region here.
It's a different type of.
And I'll say it in a second, but it looks like a banana unpeeling to me.
Flowering structure here. It doesn't have those nice 4 petals that autumn olive did. This is much narrower kind of look to it, almost like a I don't know, like a banana peel that's opening, versus autumn olive in its flowers, what it looks like in this picture here. So those are just a couple of things to be on.
So yeah, star-shaped flowers that are really apparent right now. So, but they're not always going to be there. So it's really like the leaves, that kind of like wavy, like crinkly potato chip look to them from the side profile. And just so you have this, it's very fragrant too. The flowers, they're white to yellow again, silvery scales, and you won't see that fruit until the fall. But even that is dotted with the silver scales. All right, one last one before a break, guys. You're hanging in there. We're going to take a stretch break in a second. Last tree is Japanese Angelica tree. In New Jersey, they're everywhere. In lower New York State, you'll also find them everywhere. Up in where I live in Dutchess County, I rarely see them. So some of you are going to see them all the time, and then others you're never going to see it ever. But essentially, there's nothing on that. You cannot get this wrong. Like, this is like really, really distinctive. It's a very small tree, very, very thorny stems that you're going to see here. I'll show you in the video in a second. And it has super huge, large, and what is called doubly compound leaves. And I'll tell you why. I'll show you in the video why it's doubly compound, not just single compound leaf. And it's very fern-like appearance. This whole thing is a leaf, and they can be like 4 feet long. They're enormous. So I'm just going to get right into the ID video here, just to show you it's like almost impossible to miss it. It's so distinctive. All right, here you go. This is me the other day, just out on a hike. I just happened to walk it, and I took this video.
Japanese Angelica tree trail side here, and one of the key identifying features of this is its doubly compound leaves. So this is really actually neat. This whole thing right here that you see that's attached to this stem at the base here.
So remember that's how I define a compound leaf. Does it attach to the stem there? And at each of the base of the leaflets, there's no bud there. This whole thing that I'm going to look at is a leaf.
This whole thing right here is one big leaf. And you can see that it starts to branch off here. So that's the first part of its branching off into leaflets. And
single compound would be like if it's just goes in this direction, right? If there was like a leaflet here, remember? Like there'd be a leaflet here and that's it. But this is doubly compound because it's like it's going in this direction and then it's going in that direction. That's why it's doubly compound.
And then its secondary branches are coming off here. So again, these leaflets are coming out opposite of one another, and take a look at in between those two leaflets there. You see that thorn that's sticking up here. Between each of these junctions as to where these leaflets meet, you'll see that there's a very, very sharp thorn that's sticking up in the middle. So that's one key feature to be cueing in on. These huge doubly compound leaves. So again, here's the first one, that's the single, and then double kind of going whoop. Here's the second feature to key in on Japanese Angelica tree. Look at its thorns on its stem. I mean, it's all over this stem here as I pan up and down. This almost looks like some sort of weapon that you would use in medieval days or something. So again, this is just there's nothing else really like this. Some people will call this devil's walking stick, which is kind of a similar species that's found down the south, and sometimes people will use that common name for Japanese angelica tree up here in the north as well. So again, looking for the doubly compound leaves, and this look at its really the thorns coming out of its stem all along its stem here. It's unmistakable hallmarks of Japanese angelica tree.
All right, so that's what you're looking for, folks. That's Japanese angelica tree. The only other thing I would say, and again, the spines are at the leaf axils, or where those leaflets are meeting in the middle. And the only other thing you might confuse it with is a black locust, because black locusts also have like thorns on the stem. But you'll notice the difference in the leaves. It's not doubly compound, and black locusts are like really like oval, like versus angelica tree. Look at it, it's like got serrated margins and it comes to a clear point. Black locusts are like they're just, I mean, they're oval. I don't know what else to say. That's it. And there's no thorns on the axils either, so you may confuse it with that. All right, stretch break time. So why don't we take like 5 minutes? I just need to quickly just grab some water, and then let's reconvene in like 5 minutes. You'll hear my voice. Just kind of keep the volume on so you know I'm back, but feel free to go use the bathroom. I just need to refill water because I'm doing a lot of talking here, but then I can field questions while we wait for other people to filter in. But stretching is good for you. It's not good to stare at the television, the screen, computer, or television for too long. Take a break. 5 minutes. All right, I'm back. I can answer questions if people have it. Yeah, Gregory, I see a hands raised. Go ahead. Oh, can't hear you, Greg. Got on mute.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, so you mentioned the autumn olive fruits were edible.
Yep.
That caught my attention. I was wondering just about, that aspect of all of these plants, especially the Norway maple. I've read accounts that certain Eastern European peoples ate the buds, the young leaves. Do you know anything about that one?
I don't. That's not my bailiwick. I don't know. I don't want to give you bad advice. I'm like, go eat that, and then you like.
No worries. No worries.
Something. I don't know. I don't know.
Okay, so
yeah.
you knew about the autumn olive anyway. I know
and then we'll get into like wineberry. I know you can eat too, but yeah, I'm not a good like edibles expert at all.
Okay, got it. Yeah, the Japanese angelica tree. I know Japanese people eat. They call it taranome, and they eat the shoots in the spring. But that's fine. I'll research that another time.
All right, probably have time for one more question, and then I'll take questions. I'll stay on as late as possible. Like, if hopefully we're not going to go over, but you never know. But I can stay on after the webinar. Okay, if you've got questions, just put it in the chat, then I can address them at the end.
I just put it in there, Brent, because when you were going through the tree of heaven, I'm like, I got this weird tree starting to grow in my edge of my chicken coop, and I went out and checked it, and it's the tree of heaven. I just ID'd it based on, I saw the heart score, I saw the reddish leaves, I saw the leaves just the way you described it, the heart leaf scar and everything.
See, it's working.
So, it totally. I'm like, I saw all the dots on there, and I'm like, oh my god, I gotta get rid of this before.
Yeah, I know.
See?
Well, it's just get used to it, because like you're gonna see these things everywhere now that your like eyes are peeled for it. I mean, it's been that's what's been awesome about like doing this job. I've just learned like so much about stuff that I took for granted or just like didn't notice before, and now I'm like now I see it everywhere, and you know, both good and bad. I mean, it's changed the nature experience for me. I mean, I know much more about what's around us now. It's definitely interesting. All right, I think we got to get moving, guys. So I'm going to get on to the shrubs now. So remember, shrubs are defined by having multi-stems. So you like talk about something that is definitely near. This is probably the most notorious of the invasive species in our area is Japanese barberry. And again, it's like it got this wild growth to it, arching canes. You know, it's got these thorns and spikes that come off of it, and we'll go into the ID features in a second. But just again, just like everything else, you know, it's like brought over here from Japan, introduced into an arboretum, and then became naturalized. And it was just when it began to colonize the roadside verges, open pastures, it was put on properties. You'll see it in almost everyone's property. It's like Japanese barberry is there, and it is like escaped. And it's all over our forests right now. In the 1960s, it was dispersed widely, exponentially kind of increased. And you'll see it here. It comes in different varieties. It's actually prohibited in New York State now, but it's so prevalent that it's hard to get rid of. It was rugged, versatile. I mean, deer tend to stay away from it because of the thorns on it. The berries are widely dispersed, but the berries are like low nutritional value to birds, so it may actually like seemingly helping them, but it's not good nutritional value. And like a lot of the ones I'm going to be talking about, it can reproduce through vegetative propagation. So if the canes are touching the ground, it can actually like form a new one. High reproductive output. In fact, like 12,000 seeds on any single plant with a 90% germination rate. So these are all like reasons why it's become so like everywhere. But the main thing I wanted to show you was the ID, so you know what you're looking for this list. I'm going to go into this one and then our next shrub because they're very, very similar. The next one is going to be multiflora rose. And Japanese barberry and multiflora rose have a lot of similarities, so I'm going to compare and contrast them in this video here. And we'll go over some of the features with it in a second.
First, let's take a look at these branches that I had mentioned before. So again, if you can see this almost flat, very thin, spoon-shaped leaves that run along these branches.
Again, if you have kids or grandkids, it looks like a baby spoon. That's flat leaf, like little baby spoon that you would feed to like a toddler or whatever.
And you can start to see that there are little flower buds that are starting to appear. This video is being taken in mid-April, but by May, you'll start to see these almost whitish or yellowish flowers that start to come, and they tend to come out by these little leaf clusters here. Another thing that I wanted to point out is that usually by the end of the summertime, you'll start to see these berries, these red berries appear, and these are actually lasting from last year. So these red berries are more oval in shape, and
really look at that oval shape. It looks like a little bit drawn out because that's no good way to distinguish it from multiflora rose.
Tend to be more elongated than some of the other ones that we'll see in terms of lookalikes. And if we can get a close look at what these thorns look like, you see how they go straight up and they almost look like toothpicks. And you can get an idea for scale of both of these things from my hand and fingernail next to it, right? But almost like these very, very thick, sharp ones that sharp thorns that appear at the end of the leaf clusters. So that just gives you a general look at that. The only other thing I wanted to point out is if you take a look at the base of this, zoom into the base of this, there are multiple stems that are arising on just this one plant. And again, you know, because it's so dense in the middle, you know, these harbor lots of ticks. So I got to be careful to check myself afterwards. And small mammals and rodents tend to use this as a cover, which again, you know, provides hosts for some of these ticks. So these are some of the key features. And again, taking a look at the arching branches and that almost like wild look to it. And we'll take a look at some of the lookalikes in the area. But again, you're looking for the sharp thorns at the base, the spoon-shaped, almost spatula, very thin leaves, and those arching branches. Japanese barberry lookalike alert. What we're looking at here is actually not Japanese barberry, but multiflora rose, which is another invasive species with sort of a wild growth pattern to it. So if you're out and about and you see this almost this wildness of growth in those arching branches, it may be multiflora rose. So there's a couple of different things you can look for. Let's take a look at the berries that have persisted over the winter into the early spring here. You'll see that they are red, very similar to Japanese barberry, but they're not nearly as elongated and oval in shape.
To me, they look like maracas. Like if you're playing an instrument, like maracas or something. So they got like a little, they're called rose hips, and they got a little black like dimple in the end, and they're rounder. They're not as elongated. All
right, so they're a little bit slightly rounded, and they have like the black tips at the end, as you can see here. So that's one of the features that can help distinguish it. Let's take a look at some other features about multiflora rose that are slightly different. If you take a look at the thorn, to me, that looks like the dorsal fin or of a shark or something. So it's more recurved and kind of a.
And it almost looks like the thorns are like glued on. You see how it's like a different color than the main stem? That's another thing to look for, but definitely like dorsal fin. Remember that the barberry was like a toothpick. Multiflora rose is like shark fin.
But curved towards the back versus barberry, which has a very straight, almost toothpick shape to it. And if you can see behind that thorn, you see that there is almost what are called these fringed stipules at the base. So if you can see,
remember that stipules was that plant part at the base of a leaf stalk, and it has like some features. This is very important for multiflora rose. Is what is this little like thing that looks like a little insect or caterpillar shape?
I can get my finger in there. See this little fringed, almost like these fringed stipules or the base of the.
Kind of looks like a little centipede or something, like little, like there's an insect head and these little like hairs that are coming off of it. That's the fringe
of the leaf stalk here that connects to this branch here. It's got those little like hairy projections on it, or what are called fringe. Certainly barberry doesn't have that, and this is the distinguishing feature of multiflora rose. So those are some of the features that you can look for to make sure.
So those are the main differences between like barberry, one of our shrubs on our list, and multiflora rose. In the interest of time, I'm probably going to have to skip over some of the reasons for invasion success and that sort of stuff. And there's species spotlight videos that I have available on the Trail Conference website. If you want to learn like some of the history of introduction and some of the stuff I've been talking about, reasons for invasion. But in the interest of time, just looking at the clock, just to get through all the IDs today, I think we'll have to skip over that part. But basically, like Japanese barberry, the main things you're looking for is just that the spoon-shaped leaves that look like a little baby spoon. And then multiflora rose, the other one on our list. Let's get to its main ID features. That's what that little caterpillar-like thing has on. And remember that with multiflora rose, you got the maracas, the sort of like the rose hip looks to it. It also has a clear white flower on it. But it's really like to distinguish from some of the native roses that often you're not going to really find it in nature, but you might have on your property. It's having this that stipule, that fringe stipule at the base. Okay, there's another shrub that I wanted to go over with you guys. And there's a difference between this and our native ones like black raspberry, raspberries. And this one is called wineberry. This is another shrub that's on our list. It's multi-stem deciduous shrub. It can grow to be actually quite tall, like up to 6 feet tall. And the main feature of it, you might have this on your property, and they're definitely edible. There are these bright, shiny raspberry-like fruit that are apparent in the middle of the summer. Okay. Now, in order to distinguish it from like the other species that are around it that are like raspberries, blackberries, I'll show you in this video some of the differences between it, and how to distinguish between it. Let's see. I think it's this one here. Yes. Give me a second to find it. Wineberry, the main thing that you want to look for are the reddish hairs. All right, so it's got these like arching canes like a lot of the invasives do.
Some of the native raspberries and native blackberries that we have. Here you can really see the curved arch structure of these branches. But let's take a closer look at what really distinguishes it from some of the native blackberries and raspberries are these really finish red hairs. So you can see that the branch itself is red. Sometimes it can be green, but certainly the hairs, these fine red hairs that come out are red, and it turns red typically as it matures. You can see the thorns in there as well. Those thorns are pretty straight up and down, not like the curved thorns of multiflora rose. You can see the leaves that are next.
All right, so again, it's that fuzzy stuff. And the way I remember that is wineberry. Like if you have too much wine, your head is fuzzy. So it's like that little, if you see fuzziness on it, it's going to be wineberry and not a raspberry.
Next to it. So it's a compound leaf. So it means that the leaf itself is divided into 3 leaflets. You can see that there are 3 on this. The native blackberries, raspberries have anywhere between 3 and 5. And as they grow older, those native ones will start to form into 5. But here, the wineberry will have 3. If I flip this upside down, you'll see that the underside is whitish. And as this...
That's important to look, like flip it upside down, the leaves, and see if it's white. That's a good way to tell it from, I think it's blackberry that has green all the way
around. As the wineberry matures, it'll develop even wider. And that's just another key feature. But really, it's these reddish hairs that is unlike anything else that we'd find in our forests. Here, you're looking at the curved arch of native black raspberry. But let's take a closer look, and you'll see that it's not quite like wineberry and easy to distinguish. So as we zoom in and get closer, you will see that the stem and branch itself, it's very smooth. Yes, it's got
the other thing that's interesting about it, you see how it's smooth and it's also got like a white powder on it. Like that's another thing to be looking for. It can be purplish stem. I've also seen the green stems on these before, but it's got that like white milky powder, like a white powder on it too.
Thorns that run along it, but if I move my thumb up and down here, there's none of those finest red hairs that distinguish it from it. And even though the leaves and the leaflets might look somewhat similar, it's really just this smooth part of this that and wineberry would have those finest red hairs to it. So that's
all right. So that's how you can tell the difference between that and like black raspberry. So the only other one that you might come across in the field is actual blackberry. Blackberry, the stems will be like, it almost looks like someone carved into the side of it, like they got like troughs or grooves on it typically. And it's going to have more of a 5-part leaf, especially as it gets older. Red raspberries are not quite as thorny. They will also like kind of more sparsely prickly round stems. Whoops, went to the other one. Sorry guys. So yeah, the red raspberries you might see out as well, kind of sparsely prickly round stems, not thorny. The leaves have a gray underside, but again, it's just wineberry has the fuzz on it, the hair. That's it. That's the main feature to be looking for relative to what else I've shown you in this video. All right, the next species is one that you also might have on your properties, and that is burning bush. And burning bush is a deciduous invasive shrub, and it can grow to be actually quite tall, 15 to 20 feet tall and equally as wide. It's also known as winged euonymus. I was going to do another seek thing with you guys today, but when you use seek on burning bush, it will come up, and you might want to write this down in your notes, it might come up as winged euonymus. And that's just happens to be its genus name. For some reason, it doesn't say like burning bush. But the main feature you're going to be looking for during the growing season, it's called burning bush because it turns this bright red in the fall. And so it's like it's burning and red and stuff. But it's like the main feature you're going to be looking for this time of year is its corky wings. And it's just like, it's a marvel to look at. It's like amazing that nature came up with this feature. It looks like man-made, like cardboard coming off of the stems. So I did just take a video of this in the field the other day. I'm having trouble getting out here, and just wanted to show you what it looked like. This was just taken the other day, so you can see what it looks like this time of year. Okay, and its leaf structure is another like good feature to look at, in addition to those like corky wings. This is the end of the Japanese
hallmarks
angelica.
of Japanese angelica tree. Here's a look at burning bush. You can see its growth pattern here. Very skinny stem at the base and then kind of coming up here and branching out. But what I really wanted to feature is the leaves and these branches here. Take a look at those floppy bunny ear look at the ends. These leaves are coming out opposite of.
Definitely write that down in your notes, that this, like, it's just like, it's really neat. It's kind of has that like edge to it. Imagine big bunny face in the middle there, like big bunny
One
floppy
another,
ears.
and towards the end, you see how it's like, imagine just a little bunny face in between those two there. You can also see that the margin of the leaves are toothed. You see those little like ridges coming out at the edge of the margin. That's another thing to look for. You'll notice that the leaf also comes to a point. And let's take a look at during this time of year. So this is, mid-May or so. You can really see that it's starting to flower and what those flower petals look like. Let me give you a better example. That's over here. As it zooms in, you can see four petals that are coming off of that flower. And of course, its hallmark feature, these corky wings that make burning bush so distinct. Look at that from 3 dimensions there. You can also see my thumb for a frame of reference. I mean, it really feels and has a look like perpendicular cardboard pieces that are coming off of that branch. So again, looking for that opposite leaf pattern. It'll be flowering this time of year, and it has these, nice 4-petaled flowers, and the bunny ears at the end, opposite leaf pattern with the notched leaves.
All right, so those are the main features. There's really nothing like it. Like, those corky wings are just really, really distinctive and really neat to see. The only other thing that I'll mention is, like, if you do go out in the fall, you can definitely be on the lookout for these red. They'll turn this like bright red color. This is what it looks like in profile. But again, if you see this sort of like the corky wings to it, the bunny ears at the end, you're looking at burning bush. All right, we're not going to practice with seek because we don't have time, but again, seek works really great on this. It'll just come up as winged euonymus. All right, on to the vines. But essentially, you're going to be looking for plants that are crawling over other plants. And I'm going to go through like all the different types of vines that you might see while you're out. And the first of which is Oriental bittersweet. Yikes. It is another it's another like one just like barberry that it's everywhere. It's taking down trees in our region. If you've seen this in your backyard, you'll know it's it corkscrews around. I'll show you that in the video. It's got really persistent berries. You might see these berries around trees coming off. Like if it's up high in a tree and you're seeing reddish berries, you'll notice. Have you noticed the theme? Red berries usually is not good news. They're all like invasive, a lot of them, besides like raspberries or something. And you might, like, if you ever try to get out Oriental bittersweet, the roots are orange and it's very, very insidious and very difficult to get rid of. So I wanted to show you its different features because as it's mature, it's really easy because it kind of corkscrews around the tree. But when it's younger, it kind of has the leaders that look like a striking cobra. And I want to make sure that you're able to identify that in the field in its sort of like younger form. So here's a look at what bittersweet looks like and how to ID it this time of year.
close-up look of the vines of Oriental bittersweet. And the reason you can tell is actually a couple of different ways. You see how it's wrapping around this tree in a corkscrew fashion? So it's twisting and wrapping around, almost like a python that's going up this. It's actually can even wrap around itself. You might even see these dark knobs with, again, a couple of different vines that are wrapping around itself. Also, you will notice that it has a lot of dots on it. Now, it depends on the age of that vine as to whether you'll see those, but those are lenticels and ways of oxygen exchange inside and outside of the vine. And that's another distinguishing feature of it. You got to look, it's
So again, the white lenticels on Tree of Heaven, they look different here. They look like much more mature and darker lenticels. Lenticels do not have to be white. These are bumps, and that's again used for the Oriental bittersweet. That's how you know you're looking at it, not another vine.
almost like dotted with those. But again, that depends on the vine. You can see that all throughout here, but you're really looking for that corkscrew pattern. I did want to point out that right below it is poison ivy, and again, poison ivy with the three.
Poison ivy, careful. This is all you need to think about is like there's not many things growing on vines on our trees in our region. It's like Oriental bittersweet, there's Virginia creeper, there's poison ivy, and then we'll talk about Japanese honeysuckle in a bit. But this is essentially if you see 3 leaves, you're looking at poison ivy. The other thing is poison ivy is hairy. And the way to remember that is poison ivy, it's like hairy. Don't be a dope and touch the hairy rope. Okay, so Oriental bittersweet is not hairy. It just has but poison ivy is, and it has 3 leaves.
3 leaves. So there's poison ivy going just below it here, but that's all that twistiness right there. That is classic of Oriental bittersweet. We are filming this right now at the beginning of May, and you can just see, like, even the branches that are coming out of this twisting vine here, you can see that the leaves are starting to form. And again, so this is what the leaf structure will look like. You can see that there's little teeth at the edge of the leaf.
That's another thing. Poison ivy does not have teeth on the edge of the margin. So if you're looking at something that's tooth and it's a vine, it's probably bittersweet.
So that's another classic way to look at it. So, but as this continues to grow and the growing season comes on, you can see that those leaves are growing in clusters. These will open up a bit, and I'm just looking for almost like that oval shaped look to it. With a little, like the tip at the end. Whoops, if it comes back into focus. Yeah, you see this got like comes kind of to a point, but you're looking for the teeth on it. So the teeth on the edge, kind of growing out of this cluster here, but it's really that wrapping around like a big python that you're looking for. That distinguishes it from, say, poison ivy, which tends to meander, or even Virginia creeper that tends to meander as well.
Yeah, that's the other thing is that bittersweet will corkscrew, but a lot of the other vines, they kind of like, it's almost like a river that's going up. There's no, like, it's not clearly wrapping around. Whoops.
Well, look for that corkscrewing pattern. I also wanted to show you a younger version of bittersweet and what it looks like. You can see that the bark on this stem here is a little, it's like reddish brown, and you can see that the lenticels on this are more white, or those bumps.
So when it's younger, you'll see it as white.
Gas exchange are white. You can see the leaf clusters again, and if you zoom in very closely, you can see that they're 2 little tipped points on the leaves. Okay, so when this starts growing out, you'll see that the leaves are arranged alternately as well, so they're not going to be opposite of one another as this begins to grow out. The other feature of the younger branches that I wanted to point out, we'll go over here, it's a little more obvious. So bittersweet, again, as a vine, is looking for something to wrap around, right, in that corkscrew fashion. So what you'll often see are these things that are called leaders. So you see how this is almost like, it's like a snake kind of perched up, like a cobra looking for something. It's sort of like this snake-like appearance. These leaders will come off of the main, off of the main stem and be looking to wrap itself around something. You can see that this bittersweet here is wrapping around itself. So almost this corkscrew twisting around itself. You can see how it's all tangled. So this is what the younger version of bittersweet will look like.
Yeah, and it's like I'm gonna jump ahead to like this part of the video, but like if you've ever seen this in your backyard, you'll know it's just like it's like these vines are just taking it down. That's all bittersweet. It's just wrapping around itself. I'm sure you've seen this. Like it's just bittersweet is everywhere, and it's just because it tends to wrap around stuff. So I wanted to show you what it looks like when it's younger. And just think about like a little like coiled like snake looking to pounce, and it's just nefarious, looking to wrap its stuff around things, and that's corkscrew like pattern to it. There's really nothing else like it. All right. The only other thing that I wanted to show you is that that this video was taken in May. As bittersweet gets older, the leaves get a little bit rounder. So when they're younger, they kind of have that pointy tip and the teeth on the end. But as bittersweet goes into the season, if you're out surveying later in the season, there'll be a little bit of like a rounder look to it. So just be aware of that. But essentially, if you got a vine and again, it's wrapping around something and it's got teeth on the edge, regardless of shape, it's most likely bittersweet. All right, another vine on our list. Again, this is really rare up north by me, but it's really prevalent down in New Jersey. It's called mile a minute, and well, quite frankly, it grows a mile a minute. I got the actual 6 inches in a day. 6 inches in a day. Okay, mile a minute. And this is another really easy one because there's nothing like it. Now this one doesn't tend to grow up trees. It tends to blanket understory. Look at this. This is all mile a minute all over these shrubs here. And it's known for its very highly distinctive equilateral triangle leaf shape. It's crazy. There's like nothing like it out there. And I'll show you in the video that I took the other day. But it's just very, very triangular. It's got prickles along the edge and kind of a saucer shape in the middle of that are these like stipules. It's again, I'm going through this quickly because I'll show you in the video as to look at its variation and what it looks like this time of year. But essentially, you're looking at mile a minute here on the ground. Let's see. That's what it looks like. It's really kind of neat just how like triangular it is.
A couple of things that make mile a minute stand out from other forest understory species. So first of all, take a look at its leaf shape. It's almost unlike anything else in this area. It's like almost exactly an equilateral triangle. Typically lime green in color. You can see that there is a garlic mustard leaf right next to it that kind of has more of a flowery tooth edge.
Pay attention to that because garlic mustard is on our list. That's one of our last species that we'll go over. But you see how it's like got a lot of like bumps on the edge? Well, mile a minute is just smooth triangle all the way.
To it. I mean, there's none of that happening here. Just almost pure.
And look at my thumb for frame of reference. It's small. That triangle is small. Like that's my thumb right there. Just be mindful. This is not a big leaf.
Lime green equilateral triangle. You'll also notice that it's not just those triangular leaves, but look right next to my thumb. There is a little saucer-shaped leaves at each of the nodes where, each of the stems are joining together, almost like you can put a little teacup on it or something. So that is, those saucer-shaped leaves are another hallmark of mile a minute. And even though this is early growth in the year in May, you can start to see the barbs, the little spikes that are coming off of the stem of this. Again, like little tiny shark teeth or shark dorsal fins or something coming off of this.
Hopefully you can all see that in detail. But again, it's recurved barbs. Remember that these vines need purchase. They need to get on something. And mile a minute, again, you're really going to see it mostly like all over the forest understory if you see it anywhere. It's not going to be high in trees. Like bittersweet can grow all the way up in a tree. Poison ivy can too. But like mile a minute is going to be low lying primarily.
Recurved barbs and spikes that allow it to grab onto things and sort of have that like vine adherence to whatever it's trying to grow on. And again, this is early stage of growth here in this forest understory, and eventually this will just keep growing mile a minute. That's why it's called it, and eventually blanket all of the leaf litter here and take over this area. And that's what we want to try to prevent. So be on the lookout for those triangle-shaped leaves, recurved spines, and those saucer-shaped leaves that are along at each of the nodes.
All right, so that is mile a minute. Very, very distinctive. I don't think you guys are going to have a problem with that one. I also just wanted to point out that it does have beautiful berries that you might see, but again, that's like early fall sometimes. It depends on the area, but that could be ripening in July. I've seen it throughout the fall in our region, these like really kind of neat blue berries at the end, but you're not going to see that probably during the surveying, most of the surveying season, I would guess. You're really looking for the triangle shaped leaves. And just so you guys know, we actually had a mile a minute project, and it was doing something called biological control. There's a stem boring weevil that the only thing that it eats is mile a minute. And so you might see mile a minute leaves that have these little chew holes in it. And so these weevils were released. They've been released for a long time. We're seeing like some really good responses in our native systems to these weevils being released. It's the only thing they eat. They're very, very small weevils. Like that's a penny right there. But they chew holes in it. They weaken mile a minute. And so we're putting a real dent in its spread and its continued spread in our region through biological control, it's called, or putting insects into the environment. I know that's a controversial sometimes mechanism for management, but in this case, it's literally the only thing it eats. The only other thing that might look like are bindweeds. But you know, bindweeds, for example, they don't have any thorns or those prickles or those recurved barbs. So that's one thing. Like I have bindweeds in my property, and they're just flat. They're kind of reddish hue to it. They're triangle shaped, but it's not like that equilateral triangle. I guess some people could confuse tear thumb with it, but look at like tear thumbs are actually like really kind of neat. They have like a, I don't know how to describe that. It's like a big like a wizard's hat or something shaped to it. It's not like the equilateral triangle of mile a minute. All right, this is our last vine. We are getting very close, guys, to the end. You've been a tremendous group tonight. I know this is tough, the 2 hours. But Japanese honeysuckle is another vine. And again, this is not a vine that tends to grow high up in trees. It really is kind of a low-lying vine that kind of sprawl on the forest floor. Its main feature that I'll point out in the video here in a second is its opposite leaf structure. And to me, they look like propellers on a plane. You see how if you look here, see they're like a bow tie or something. So imagine that kind of like circling around. I'll show that in the video too. And they can really coat everything. Japanese honeysuckle can be all over the forest understory. And just like most of the honeysuckles, we have bush honeysuckle too that I showed you before with that banana peel flower. You know, honeysuckles, the flowers grow in pairs, but we won't see that flowering for a little bit. If you went out right now, all you would see was this like the bow tie propeller like leaves to it, and it's kind of along the forest understory. I took a quick video the other day. This is outside of the trail conference where you can find a lot of this stuff, unfortunately, that we still need to get under control. But this is what a Japanese honeysuckle looks like.
Here's a look at an area covered in Japanese honeysuckle. You can see that it's a vine and has that sort of cobra-like leader, very similar to Oriental bittersweet in the way it's looking for purchase to wrap around something. So the way to tell the Japanese honeysuckle apart from some of the other vines is that, again, it's got that opposite leaf structure to it that almost look like airplane propellers or something. They're coming off of one another. Imagine this like whirling around or something as a propeller. That's what I kind of look for, or almost like a bow tie appearance to it. Again, it's like got like pointier leaves.
Now, remember that this is an entire smooth margin. Bittersweet, for example, has the bumps on it, right? It has the teeth. So this is a smooth one, opposite leaves.
Often Japanese honeysuckle will have this sort of a reddish stem to it. You can even see over here, it's even more obvious that, like, again, that opposite leaf structure and sort of this reddish pattern to it. And again, its leader is always looking for something to wrap around. As I
just like bittersweet, that cobra look to it.
This part of this log in this natural area here, you can see that it's wrapping around it. But unlike Oriental bittersweet, it won't necessarily corkscrew. It just finds a way to kind of like wrap and weave around it, but doesn't have the necessarily the distinctive corkscrewing that you might see with Oriental bittersweet. So that's what you're looking for with Japanese honeysuckle.
So again, I find that it's a little kind of like hairy reddish stem to it, and the propeller look. I mean, and it is kind of like pretty prevalent in our area, so I imagine that you may see it. That's Japanese honeysuckle. All right, guys, we're on to the herbaceous plants. There's 3 left. Hang in there. Herbaceous plants. This is one I guarantee almost everybody has seen. Japanese knotweed. And it is another really bad, notorious invasive species in our area. It's tall, robust. It's semi-woody, it's perennial that forms dense stands. And really what you notice straight away is if you get up close to it, is that quick growth on thick reddish brown single stems, that zigzag-like appearance. Its genus name, Polygonum, is poly means many, and goni means knee joint. So it looks like a lot of knees zigzagging back and forth. And it can grow really, really tall. This poor girl is being smothered by by Japanese knotweed. Again, I took a video of it the other day just so you can see what it looks like this time of year. If you look at the features of it, let me get to the kind of the summary slide here. The other thing to be looking for is its leaves are huge when it really matures, and they look like shields and a very, very flat base to it and shield shaped. And again, it's the best to just show you the video of what it looks like at this time of year, because that's what you're going to be seeing out in the field and the different variations. It's one thing to look at pictures, but when you see it actually in the field, it makes a big difference to what it's going to appear like at that time of year. So here you go, Japanese knotweed.
Here's a look at a whole field of Japanese knotweed. This is not a good situation and something that we want to avoid in our natural areas. In terms of IDs, this is a really like the hallmark of Japanese knotweed are these shield-shaped leaves. It's such a unique structure to it, right? You got this this pointed tip, kind of a flat base to it. You can look at this one that I'm holding here as well as the one next to it. You know, that kind of like a flat base triangle shape to it, point at the end. And of course, you know, it's also called Japanese bamboo, and you can see its zigzag-like structure here. It kind of goes out to the left there and kind of comes back, zigzag, back and forth type of routine to it. You can see that it has a kind of a speckled reddish or purplish hue to the stems of this, and does have a, you know, a very like bamboo-like feel to it. So as I zoom out, again, just looking for those features, I would say that this is about, you know, like this is in some places like 7 feet high. And you can just see the different variations within this field completely covered by it. But again, it's the shield-shaped leaves, kind of this zigzag-like appearance to its stems, reddish purplish color. And you can see these little nodes too. That's another feature to hone in on.
That's
right?
like sort of the knee joint, right, where it's bending. There are these little nodes on it. So that's another thing to be on the lookout for. The leaves can get really, really big, and it can be very, very tall. Like this was 7 feet at this time of year, and the leaves weren't that big. There's actually 3 main like species of knotweed that have all hybridized in our area. So we can't even say it's just one big mishmash of species right now of Japanese knotweed in our region. So, you know, we're not even distinguishing between the species anymore. Just call it Japanese knotweed. So that, again, you'll see it's flowering too. Pollinators do use it. You know, this happens later in the year. Probably not going to see it during the survey season, but that's what it looks like when it's flowering. It is a good pollinator one, but you're pollinating something that's easily fragmented. The fragments can sprout up. It's found in riparian areas and along streams, and just like you can literally break off just a little bit of it and it can form a new plant. It's really bad. And you know what's interesting, in the UK where it's really, really bad, they're all clones. They're all female from one parent plant in the UK, all of the UK. Isn't that crazy? It's just one big clone, and it's everywhere. So it's very, very hard to get rid of once it's established. Okay, getting to the last ones. Garlic mustard, another herbaceous plant. You saw a little bit of it in the video before, but this is a really neat herbaceous plant because it's a biennial, meaning that it goes through 2 distinct stages over two years. This is what its first year of growth looks like. It's called a rosette, and that's the one you saw. I think I forgot what video it was. It was what the heck was it that I just showed you before? Remember, it had the teeth on the edge, the scalloped edges to it. And that's what it looks like in its first year of growth. It's a member of the mustard family. But then in its second year, it actually starts bolting upright. So this is these parts of the garlic mustard are pretty close to the ground. And then in its second year, it bolts upright. It can be actually quite tall. This time of year, you walk outside your house, I guarantee you're going to see it. The white flowers are out. These are called saliques here. It's like these stalks. They contain the seeds. they shoot out like ballistic missiles when it's getting ready to DC. But this is what it looks like. The flowers look like this time of year. But it's just kind of neat because it actually looks very different from its first year to its second year. And this is a video I took the other day of garlic mustard. And the only other thing that it looks like, and the reason why I put it next to it, you could confuse it with violets. Violets are another ground cover plant that you might see in the area that you can confuse it with. So I just wanted to show them right next to one another so you can distinguish between them.
Here, rosette stage of garlic mustard. As you can see here, here's a great example of violet as a ground cover species. You can see how it comes to a really sharp point.
So this is violet. Violet is going to be much more heart-shaped, okay? And then there's going to be garlic mustard within this. So what I'm pointing out right now, you can see the violets there. This is violet.
Point at the end, you see how it's very heart-shaped with its flowering structure in the middle here. You know, it can come in different colors. This one happens to be a purplish color, but again, the violet's like very, very heart-shaped, right? Now, right next to it is garlic mustard. I'm going to put these two right next to each other. You see the difference?
That's the perfect shot for you because there's no question, right? You see how this is scalloped edges, it's much rounder, right? And violets are much more heart-shaped, and I'll go through the leaf veins as well.
In the veins between them, so my thumb is holding the violet, that heart shape, and then here's the garlic mustard first year rosettes right next to it, right? So yeah, I mean, it kind of has that like scalloped edges to it. You know, the bumps around the margins are a little bit more like, I don't know, there's a little bit more of a distance between them. It's definitely rounder per se than the violets here, which are very.
And of course, it's called garlic mustard because if you pull it up and you crush it, it smells like garlic. And it actually makes a good pesto. I've had plenty of people like do that. You can pull it up, especially during the rosette stage, and crush it up into a pesto. All right. I just wanted to show you what the second year of growth looks like.
Garlic mustard, which I'm zooming in on. You can see the second year of garlic mustard, and look at the difference between it, right? I mean, my hand is about like a couple feet off the ground here. You can see its white flowers that I am holding in my fingers now. Again, this is mid-May, where it's very, very obvious. This whole field of garlic mustard, very distinctive white flowers as well. You can kind of zoom in on what they look like. You can see the 4 petals, and they come out towards the top of the plant. You can also see its distinctive calyx where the seeds are held. So interestingly, these will actually explode in this like ballistic propulsion when they're ready to start spreading. Again, this is very easy to pull out at this stage and can be easily removed from your property if you have it. I also wanted to hone in on the leaf structure. Just notice the difference between the second year of growth of garlic mustard. You can see that the leaves are much bigger and much more triangular, and you juxtapose that with the garlic mustard rosettes. You see how it's much rounder here in its first year, and then now in its second year of growth, as it starts to bolt up.
That's so weird, right? That the leaf changes shape. It's much more triangular. It's very distinctive.
Right. It's much more triangular in shape. And again, that really complex venation on it as well. And again, this is a couple feet up growing out of the ground. Look for the distinctive white flowers as well as these like calyx.
The only other thing I want to point out about the calyx is that this is once it loses its flowers and stuff and it kind of releases the seeds, you'll see these like skeletons of the calyx, and you might see that on the trail. It's actually very important. They've turned like a tannish color, and I bet you if you went out to your property, you'd see last year's remnants of it. But when you're on the trail doing the survey, you might actually see like, some of the older garlic mustard because it holds its shape. It's almost like a ghost skeleton of garlic mustard. Alrighty, guys, we are on our last species. You have done it. You have made it through 2 hours. Let's get to the last one, which is another pretty bad one that we find in our area. It is Japanese stiltgrass. So Japanese stiltgrass is the one grass is the one grass that's on our list, and it can really cause a lot of problems in the forest understory. The main feature of Japanese stiltgrass that distinguishes it from other grasses is sort of like a lime greenish look to it. The thing is that you're not really going to see it right now, but in a couple of weeks it starts to come out. but it grows up. That's why it's called stilt. It's like up on stilts, but you're looking for a silvery, shiny stripe down the leaf axis. It's very weak stemmed. It's really actually easy to pull out. It's just like very weak stems, like yoink, except it's so prolific in how it spreads that if you don't get it early, it's very, very difficult to control. So this is one final video, guys, one final one. And then you have done it. You will be officially trained and ready to go. But I just wanted to show you at the end. I think it's this one here. Yes, here you go. Last couple minutes here, guys.
Shaped look to it. So
okay,
just a couple of things to be on the lookout for garlic mustard when you're out and about. In this same field of garlic mustard, you're also going, I don't know if you saw another invasive species here, but this is Japanese stiltgrass, and it's all over this area in which I'm out in the forest right here. And again, right now, Japanese stiltgrass is just starting to grow. It's got kind of a lime green appearance to it, and actually won't have that distinctive silver stripe on it. But just to put my thumb down there for reference, just to show.
Yeah, so basically you're not going to see the striping on it, but the bottom line is that if you're seeing grass that is growing, like really blanketing an area, most of the native grasses that we have in a forest setting, they're going to come in clumps. Japanese stiltgrass does not clump. It's like it's there and it's everywhere.
Show you, but this is all stiltgrass, lime green appearance. You can see that the main blade of grass, you know, it's really easy to pull out. That's what the roots are going to look like. And you can see that there's like the main blades are kind of coming off alternately on the primary part of the grass.
Like they're up on stilts. So boom, then space, then boom. Very alternate, like the blades coming off of that. And that's another feature you're looking at stiltgrass.
And almost like look like left, right, kind of those blades of grass coming out. Really easy to pull out, unlike some of the other grasses, but very, very prevalent. You can see it's just all around here. And on forests around you, if you're seeing a lot of this like matted, dense grass that especially at this time of year is low to the ground, it's most likely going to be stiltgrass. And I would recommend, till you get the hang of like recognizing what it is, use Seek on it. Seek does a really nice job of recognizing Japanese stiltgrass. So
yeah, it does. It should get it right straight away for you. Okay. So again, I don't know what else to say other than like I really appreciate you guys taking 2 hours out of your night to learn these species. I will like you're really going to learn very quickly if you review some of this stuff or the ones that you're a little like fuzzy on before you go out by watching a taped version of this video or whatever, whatever method, and you use the Seek app, you're going to be fine. I mean, I've trained enough volunteers in the past to know that even if you had no plant background at all, like you can succeed. I'm very proud of you for like kind of hanging in there. It's a 2-hour webinar is hard, but just remember that you always have me. You always have this video to fall back on, and there's lots of tools for you to succeed out there. So the next steps essentially is that I'm going to be in touch with you. There's going to be a follow-up live streamed webinar that's going to walk you through the field protocol. So we learned the plants today. And then the next part is like, okay, how do I record what I'm seeing? Like, how does that work? That is on May 27th. You can go to our Trail Conference events page to find that. And once you viewed or attended that second webinar, you're going to be ready for a field assignment. So again, if you can't make May 22nd, it's not the end of the world. I always find that coming to live streamed events is better. It's more interactive and it kind of keeps you on point to be like, I'm in it. I'm here, I'm going to do it. Versus watching the tape version, sometimes you can like forget about it or whatever, but it will be available. And lots of people have been trained just by watching the taped versions of the live stream stuff. But if you can make the live one on May 27th, that'd be great. Prior to your field assignment, you're going to receive a full color field guide of all the species from me. I'll send it digitally to you. You're going to have full access to this webinar and any future relevant webinars. We have a digital library at the Trail Conference called the Online Learning Library, which has lots of like taped recordings of stuff that I've done over the years and some of my colleagues have. Some 5-minute species spotlights. I really had to go very, very, normally I don't even talk about like invasive species impacts and effects today. I thought I could get it in 2 hours, but it was just a little bit too much, the timing wise. So if you did want to learn about like how does barberry like influencing native plants, like how is that plant specifically doing that? We have some like taped versions of those species spotlights you could watch on your own time. I just didn't have time to fit that in today. The main thing is the ID part, because that's what the surveying is, right? It's going to help us with management decisions down the road. Of course, you'll have access to me with questions anytime. Bother me. You know, I've got my phone on me. I've got my computer. Happy to help. That's my job. You're going to get an assignment from me down the road. Once you've done that field survey protocol, I'm going to give you an assignment. And you learned that in the sort of like the orientation video. The assignment's going to be like in a park that's convenient to you. You're going to have the full summer, like starting like we still can't survey yet because we're waiting for some of the things to leaf out still. So you still got to be patient for another couple of weeks, but you're going to have the full summer all the way to the fall to complete it. Normally you get like a 1 to 2 mile trail assignment. I would say a beginner usually takes about, it depends on how many invasive species you find, but probably about 6 hours or something to complete. Some people like to knock it out all in one weekend and just make a day or weekend of it. And some people like just to chip away at it, like after work. And, you know, like I have an hour to spare. I'll go start part of the trail. And then like next weekend, I'll do another hour, whatever. It's totally up to you. And that's what's great about our programs. Once you're done, you're going to submit that data back to us. And then you're going to, at the end, once you completed your assignment, we have some good like volunteer appreciation gifts, and of course, many thanks and congratulations. You're doing a wonderful thing for like protecting the areas that we all like enjoy for various reasons, you know? So with that, oh, it's 8:31. I'm 1 minute off. That's not bad. That's not bad. But I will take questions. Of course, you can email me at any time. I'm happy to stay. I know you guys are probably like ready to call it a night, but I'm more than happy to stay on and answer questions for you. I'm going to stop the recording there and just want to say once again, thank you for attending. And I'm here for questions and to help address whatever you need moving forward, and glad you were a part of it. Thank you again, guys.